On the first Sunday anyone could remember, the basket appeared before dawn. It wasn't flashy. There were no balloons, no ribbons tied into elaborate bows, nothing that called attention to itself. Just a weathered wicker basket sitting quietly on the front porch of a little white farmhouse at the edge of Maple Creek, Iowa, where the gravel road met a field of corn that seemed to stretch forever beneath the pale blue sky. Inside were fresh bread still warm from an oven, canned vegetables, a gallon of milk, a dozen brown eggs, homemade blackberry jam, and an envelope with enough cash to cover a month's worth of electric bills. There was no signature, no note explaining why, only a small strip of blue ribbon tied around the handle. By the time the widow living in that farmhouse arrived home from the early church service, half the town already knew. By the following Wednesday, another anonymous gift appeared outside the trailer of a young family whose father had been laid off from the grain elevator. A week later, the medical balance for a little boy recovering from heart surgery was mysteriously paid in full. Then an elderly veteran found his propane tank refilled before the first frost. A struggling dairy farmer discovered pallets of feed delivered overnight. Every gift arrived just before someone reached the point of giving up. No cameras caught anyone. No neighbors saw a truck. No one claimed responsibility. And with every passing week, one question echoed through the pews of Grace Fellowship Church: who was quietly changing lives while asking for nothing in return? No one could have imagined that the answer had been sitting among them almost every Sunday, and that when the truth finally came to light, it would cause an entire church to look at kindness, faith, and even one another in a completely different way. Maple Creek wasn't the kind of place people passed through by accident. It was the kind of town where generations stayed. The water tower rose above grain silos and church steeples, and every storefront along Main Street carried memories older than most of the people shopping inside them. Folks waved from pickup trucks whether they knew you or not. Children still rode bicycles until the streetlights flickered on. Friday nights belonged to high school football. Saturday mornings belonged to the farmers market, and Sunday belonged to Grace Fellowship. The church sat on a gentle hill overlooking the town, its white clapboard siding glowing softly in the morning sun. The building wasn't large, but it held decades of weddings, funerals, baptisms, Christmas pageants, potluck dinners, and prayers whispered through seasons of joy and heartbreak alike. If walls could remember, those walls remembered everything. Every Sunday, before most people arrived, Eleanor Brooks unlocked the side door with the same brass key she had carried for nearly 30 years. At 68, Eleanor moved a little slower than she once had, but there was a quiet steadiness about her that never seemed to change. Her silver hair was always pinned neatly beneath a simple hat during the colder months, and she wore the same faded blue cardigan so often that children jokingly called it her Sunday sweater. She never minded. In fact, she smiled every time they said it. She switched on the sanctuary lights one row at a time, humming softly as sunlight filtered the stained glass windows, painting gentle colors across the wooden pews. She filled the coffee urns downstairs, arranged fresh flowers near the pulpit whenever someone had donated them, and made certain every hymnal was tucked neatly into its place. No one asked her to do those things anymore. She simply did them. Some people serve because they're noticed. Others serve because they can't imagine not serving. Eleanor belonged to the second kind. Years earlier, she had been an elementary school teacher known for remembering every child's birthday without ever writing it down. After her husband Frank passed away from cancer 12 years before, the school retired her with tears and standing applause. Since then, Grace Fellowship had quietly become the rhythm of her days. She wasn't lonely exactly, but grief has a way of becoming a companion that sits quietly beside you without saying much. Some mornings, while watering the roses Frank had planted decades earlier, she still caught herself turning toward the porch, expecting to see him with 2 cups of coffee. Then reality would settle in gently. Like morning dew, she never complained, not to anyone. Pastor Michael Carter often noticed that about her. At 59, Michael had served Grace Fellowship long enough to know almost every family story within 50 miles. He wasn't the kind of pastor who thundered from the pulpit. He preferred conversations over coffee, hospital visits, front porch prayers, and listening more than speaking. He liked Eleanor more because she rarely talked about herself. She asked about everyone else. "How's your granddaughter doing? Did your son's surgery go well? Tell your wife the pie was wonderful." Small questions, Big Heart. One Sunday after the service, Pastor Michael watched Eleanor carefully stack folding chairs in the fellowship hall. "You know," he said with a smile, "one of these days we're going to convince somebody younger to do all this." She laughed softly. "And rob them of the blessing. I suppose you've got me there." She smiled, but her eyes drifted toward the window overlooking the church parking lot. People hugged before climbing into pickup trucks. Children chased one another between parked cars. Someone carried leftover casserole dishes toward a minivan. Community. It looked beautiful from a distance. Yet Eleanor also knew what most people couldn't see. Mrs. Whitaker worried every month about paying for insulin. The Reynolds family was pretending everything was fine after losing the farm contract. Young Caleb Simmons smiled every Sunday despite months of physical therapy after heart surgery. The Hendersons had quietly started skipping Wednesday dinners because grocery money had grown tight. Need often wore its nicest clothes to church, and pride could hide behind the warmest smile. Across town, Daniel Pierce stood outside Pierce Hardware greeting customers with the confidence of someone who believed every problem had a practical solution. At 45, Daniel had built the family business into the busiest hardware store in the county. Organized, respected, generous with local charities, and elected to nearly every church committee at least once. He genuinely cared about Maple Creek, but Daniel also believed that transparency solved nearly everything. If something couldn't be explained, it deserved investigating. When word spread about the mysterious gifts, his first reaction wasn't wonder. It was concern. "People mean well," he told his wife over dinner one evening, "but if someone's handing out cash anonymously, eventually somebody's going to take advantage of it." His wife, Rachel, stirred her soup thoughtfully. "Or maybe someone's simply helping. I hope that's all it is. You don't sound convinced." "I've seen too much to believe every mystery has a fairy tale ending." Rachel smiled. "And I've seen enough to know kindness doesn't always need an audience." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he stared through the kitchen window as the sun disappeared beyond harvested fields. The gifts kept coming, always when someone needed them most, always with that same narrow blue ribbon. No fingerprints, no explanation, just enough to keep hope alive. Even the local newspaper printed a short article calling the unknown giver Maple Creek's guardian neighbor. The story spread beyond county lines. Visitors started attending Sunday services, hoping to hear some dramatic announcement. None came. Ray's fellowship remained as puzzled as everyone else. One chilly October morning, 16-year-old Lily Harper arrived early with a camera hanging around her neck. Photography had become her escape after her mother passed away 3 years earlier. While other teenagers scrolled endlessly through phones, Lily wandered fields searching for sunlight filtering through old barns, birds landing on fence posts, and moments most people hurried past. Her father, Ben, worked as the church custodian. She often helped before services. As she photographed frost sparkling across the church lawn, she noticed Eleanor kneeling beside the flower beds, gently brushing fallen leaves away from blooming chrysanthemums. Click. Another picture. Pastor Michael, unlocking the sanctuary. Click. Children chasing each other around the bell tower. Click. She loved ordinary moments. Sometimes they revealed extraordinary things later. She had no idea just how true that would become. Inside the fellowship hall, conversations inevitably circled back to the mystery. "I heard it was someone from Des Moines. My cousin says it's a retired millionaire. What if it's somebody who inherited money? What if it's an angel?" That suggestion earned laughter. Yet no one dismissed it completely, because hope has always made room for impossible explanations. Only Eleanor remained strangely quiet whenever the topic surfaced. Not nervous, not uncomfortable, simply thoughtful, as though every new rumor reminded her of something she couldn't quite bring herself to say. Pastor Michael noticed. So did Daniel. Neither mentioned it. Not yet. That evening, after sunset painted the Iowa sky in shades of amber and violet, Eleanor locked the church doors and began walking toward her aging sedan. Halfway across the parking lot, she stopped. Something caught her eye. Near the back entrance, tucked carefully beside the food pantry donation box, sat another wicker basket, smaller than the others. The same blue ribbon, the same careful wrapping. No one else was around. She looked across the empty parking lot. Nothing moved except dry leaves carried by the autumn wind. Slowly, she bent down and lifted the basket. Inside was a single loaf of warm bread, a handwritten note folded neatly beneath it, and an old silver key she recognized instantly. The color drained from her face. She whispered only 3 words. "It can't be." Before she could unfold the note, headlights swept across the parking lot. Someone else had just arrived. The headlights rolled slowly across the gravel lot before coming to a stop beside the fellowship hall. Eleanor instinctively closed her hand around the old silver key and slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan before lifting the basket against her side. By the time the driver's door opened, the look of surprise on her face had softened into the familiar calm everyone in Maple Creek expected from her. It was Pastor Michael. He stepped out carrying a folder tucked beneath one arm and smiled apologetically. "I forgot tomorrow night's Bible study notes," he said. "Looks like I'm not the only one who couldn't stay away from church." Eleanor forced a gentle smile. "I was just locking up." His eyes drifted toward the basket. "Another one," she nodded. "It appears so." He glanced around the empty parking lot, scanning the darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights. The wind stirred through the maple trees, carrying the scent of harvested fields. There wasn't another soul in sight. "I don't understand how they keep doing this," he murmured. "Neither do I." He reached for the basket, expecting to see the familiar groceries or envelopes everyone had been talking about. Instead, Eleanor shifted it ever so slightly. "I'll take it inside," she said. "We'll look at it in the morning." Pastor Michael noticed the hesitation but didn't press her. After years of ministry, he learned there were moments when questions could wait. "If you're sure." "I am." They walked inside together, exchanged good night, and locked the doors behind them. Only after Eleanor reached her little farmhouse did she finally set the basket on the kitchen table, beneath the warm glow of the hanging light. For several long moments she simply stared at it. Then she unfolded the note. The handwriting stopped her cold. It wasn't merely familiar, it was impossible. Every curve of every letter matched the handwriting she had watched for more than 40 years on birthday cards, grocery lists, and little notes tucked into lunch boxes. Frank's handwriting. Her husband had been gone for 12 years. Her fingers trembled as she read, "When the time is right, you'll know where this belongs. Until then, trust that every seed planted in love still grows." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Tears gathered before she realized she was crying. She opened the drawer beneath the telephone and slowly removed an old recipe card Frank had written decades earlier. She laid it beside the note. Every letter, every space, every slant, identical. She whispered into the silence. How could this be? The silver key rested beside the note. She knew exactly what it unlocked, or at least what it used to unlock. An old wooden storage cabinet in the basement of Grace Fellowship. The cabinet hadn't been opened in years. As far as she knew, nothing important remained inside. Yet someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to place that key in her hands. She barely slept that night. The following morning, Maple Creek buzzed with another story. This time, the anonymous giver had paid for repairs on the Simmons family's furnace just hours before the first freezing temperatures of the season. It happened overnight, people said. The repair company arrived before breakfast. They said the bill had already been covered. Daniel Pierce listened quietly as customers repeated the latest rumors inside his hardware store. Something no longer felt like coincidence. Whoever this person was knew intimate details about people's lives. Not gossip, facts. Exact bills, exact needs, exact timing. That bothered him. After closing the store, he drove directly to the church. Pastor Michael was stacking chairs when Daniel entered. "This has gone far enough," Daniel said. The pastor looked up calmly. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone has access to information they shouldn't have. You think they're spying on people. I think they're somehow finding out private financial problems before anyone else." Pastor Michael leaned against one of the tables. "Or maybe they're simply paying attention." Daniel shook his head. "No, this is different." "The furnace payment?" "Exactly. Only a handful of people even knew that family needed help." The words lingered between them. For the first time, Pastor Michael found himself considering something he hadn't wanted to admit. Someone inside the community knew far more than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Eleanor returned quietly to Grace Fellowship, carrying the basket beneath a folded blanket. She waited until she heard Pastor Michael and Daniel talking upstairs before slipping through the basement door. The old basement smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and decades of church suppers. Rows of folding tables lined one wall. Christmas decorations filled another. Near the furnace stood the cabinet, exactly what she remembered. The brass lock was dull with age, hard pounding. She slid the silver key into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a soft click. Inside were several empty shelves, nothing more. Or so it seemed. As she began closing the door, something caught her eye. A loose wooden panel near the back. She reached inside. The panel shifted. Hidden behind it rested a narrow tin box covered in years of dust. She carried it carefully to an old table and lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of folded envelopes. Every one of them was sealed. Every one bore a different name. Names she recognized immediately. Families from Grace Fellowship. Some had moved away years ago. Some had already passed into eternity. Others still sat in the same pews every Sunday. Beneath the envelopes rested a worn leather notebook. She opened it slowly. The first page carried only a single sentence. "If you're reading this, it means kindness has found its next caretaker." Her breath caught. The remaining pages contained dates stretching back nearly 25 years. Lists of groceries, medical expenses, heating bills, school tuition, anonymous deliveries, acts of generosity carefully recorded without ever identifying who had received them publicly. It wasn't the record of one gift. It was the history of hundreds. Eleanor lowered herself into a nearby chair. The mystery hadn't begun a few months ago. It had been quietly unfolding for decades. Upstairs, footsteps echoed across the sanctuary floor. Someone was coming downstairs. She hurriedly closed the notebook and slipped it back into the tin box just as the basement door creaked open. "Lily?" The teenage girl smiled sheepishly, camera hanging around her neck. "Sorry. Dad asked me to grab more light bulbs." Eleanor relaxed. "I almost didn't hear you." Lily noticed the dust covering Eleanor's hands. "Were you cleaning something?" "In a way." Lily tilted her head. "You look like you've seen a ghost." For a moment, Eleanor almost laughed. Some memories can feel that way. Lily wasn't convinced, but she respected Eleanor too much to pry. As she collected the box of bulbs, her camera accidentally slipped from her shoulder. The lens cap popped off. Several printed photographs spilled across the floor. "I'm always dropping things," Lily sighed. Eleanor knelt to help gather them. One photograph stopped her. It showed the church parking lot before sunrise 2 weeks earlier. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then she noticed an old pickup truck parked beneath the maple trees at the far edge of the property, half hidden in shadow. She looked at another photograph. The same truck, different boarding, different angle. Again, another picture. The same truck, always before sunrise, always gone before service began. "Lily," Eleanor asked quietly, "whose truck is this?" "I'm not sure. You've seen it before. I didn't even notice it until I started organizing my pictures last night." She spread several more photographs across a table. There it was again. Sometimes only the bumper, sometimes only part of the cab, always present, always unnoticed. Eleanor felt the notebook suddenly grow much heavier beneath her arm. Upstairs, Daniel's voice echoed through the hallway as he called for Pastor Michael. At almost the same moment, Lily looked closely at one of the photographs and frowned. "Wait. What is it?" She pointed toward the truck's rear window. There was a small white decal, barely visible, magnified through her camera. It became just clear enough to recognize. It wasn't a business logo. It wasn't a sports team. It was a tiny carving of a blue ribbon, the very same ribbon that had appeared on every anonymous gift. Eleanor slowly looked from the photograph to the hidden notebook in her hands. For the first time, she realized the mystery wasn't simply about discovering who had been leaving the gifts. Someone had inherited a mission, and whoever they were still carrying it out. The photograph lay between Eleanor and Lily, like a piece of evidence no one had intended to uncover. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Outside, the church bells began chiming 6 o'clock, their familiar sound drifting through the old basement windows. But down there everything suddenly felt different. The church Eleanor had known for decades seemed to be hiding another life beneath the one everyone could see. Lily carefully picked up the photograph again. "I've looked through hundreds of pictures," she whispered. "I never noticed that truck until today." Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on the tiny blue ribbon decal in the rear window. "Sometimes," she said softly, We only recognize something after we're ready to see it. She wasn't sure whether she was talking to Lily or to herself. Upstairs, voices echoed through the fellowship hall. Daniel Pierce had begun speaking with Pastor Michael, and although the words were muffled, Eleanor could hear the urgency in Daniel's tone. "We shouldn't tell anyone about this yet," Eleanor said. Lily looked surprised. "You think someone's in danger?" "I don't know." "Then why keep it quiet?" Eleanor hesitated, "Because whoever has been doing this has gone to great lengths to remain unknown. I don't want curiosity to destroy something we don't yet understand." Lily nodded slowly. She trusted Eleanor. She always had. The two of them carefully returned the notebook and envelopes to the hidden compartment before locking the cabinet once more. Eleanor slipped the silver key back into her pocket. As they climbed the basement stairs, Daniel turned toward them. "There you are." His expression immediately changed when he noticed the dust on Eleanor's sleeves. "Were you downstairs?" "I was looking for old Christmas decorations." "In October?" She smiled gently. "I like being prepared." Daniel wasn't convinced. He had spent enough years running a business to recognize when someone answered without truly answering. Before he could ask another question, Lily quickly held up the box of light bulbs. "Dad needed these." The conversation shifted, for the moment, but Daniel's curiosity had only grown stronger. That evening, Maple Creek gathered for its annual harvest supper. The fellowship hall filled with the smells of roast chicken, homemade noodles, sweet corn, fresh biscuits, apple pie, and coffee strong enough to satisfy every farmer in the county. Children laughed between the tables. Older couples caught up on grandchildren. Someone began playing familiar hymns on the upright piano near the corner. It felt like every other harvest supper, except everyone kept talking about the anonymous gifts. "I heard another family received groceries yesterday." "My cousin says somebody paid off a widow's property taxes." "No, that one's just a rumor." "What if it's someone from outside town?" Daniel listened carefully as conversation drifted from table to table. Patterns began forming in his mind. Every recipient had some connection to Grace Fellowship. Every gift met an exact need. Every delivery happened before sunrise. Whoever the mysterious giver was, they knew the church family better than almost anyone. Across the room, Eleanor quietly refilled coffee cups. She noticed things others didn't. Mrs. Whitaker rubbing her aching hands. Young Caleb laughing louder than he had in months. The Reynolds family smiling for the first time since losing their farm contract. The gifts had done more than meet financial needs. They had restored hope. Then she noticed someone else, Samuel Walker. Most people barely knew his name. At 72, Samuel worked evenings cleaning the church 3 nights a week. He rarely joined conversations, usually arriving after everyone else and leaving before the parking lot emptied. His denim jacket looked older than some of the teenagers volunteering in the kitchen. His work boots were clean but worn. His smile was gentle. Tonight, however, Eleanor noticed something she had never paid attention to before, as Samuel carried empty serving trays toward the kitchen. His key ring slipped from his pocket. Hanging beside his truck keys was a tiny blue ribbon, not fabric, carved from wood, only an inch long. Samuel quickly tucked the keys away. Had anyone else seen it? Apparently not. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. Later that evening, she quietly mentioned it to Lily. "The ribbon?" Lily frowned. "You think it means something?" "I don't know." But after today, neither of them finished the sentence. Meanwhile, Daniel had reached a decision. The mystery had gone on long enough. The following Sunday, immediately after morning worship, he stood before the congregation. "I'd like to say something." Conversations stopped. Pastor Michael looked uncertain, but stepped aside. Daniel folded his hands. "I think we're all grateful for the kindness that's been shown throughout our community." Heads nodded, "but I also believe we're responsible for protecting one another." The room grew quiet. If someone has access to private financial information or personal struggles, we need to understand how. A murmur spread through the sanctuary. Daniel continued, "I'm asking anyone who knows anything to come forward privately." Silence. No one moved. Not a single hand rose. After several uncomfortable moments, Pastor Michael gently thanked everyone and closed the service with prayer. People lingered outside afterward discussing Daniel's announcement. Some agreed, "Tampa Bay." Others thought it unnecessary. One elderly woman quietly said, "Not every blessing needs an explanation." Daniel overheard her. He wanted to agree, but something still didn't feel right. That afternoon, Lily sat at the dining room table organizing nearly 800 photographs she'd taken over the past year. She enlarged image after image on her laptop. The truck appeared again, always before dawn, always parked beneath the maple trees. Then something entirely different caught her attention. Not the truck. A person. In one photograph taken through morning fog, someone walked away from the truck carrying 2 wicker baskets. The figure wore a heavy coat with the hood pulled up. The face couldn't be seen. Lily zoomed in. The image became grainy, but one detail remained surprisingly clear. The person wasn't walking alone, just a few steps behind them. Another figure followed, smaller, older, using a cane. Her pulse quickened. 2 people, not one. She printed the photograph immediately and bicycled to Eleanor's farmhouse. When Eleanor opened the front door, Lily held up the picture without saying a word. Eleanor stared at it. Then she slowly sat down. "I was wrong. What do you mean? I thought someone inherited this mission." "You don't anymore." Eleanor looked again at the 2 shadowed figures. "No. What do you think now?" "I think it was never meant for one person." The words settled heavily between them. Before either could speak again, there was a knock at the front door. Daniel Pierce stood outside. Neither Eleanor nor Lily had expected to see him. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said politely. His eyes immediately fell upon the photograph lying on Eleanor's table. For just an instant, no more than a heartbeat, he recognized the truck. Eleanor saw it in his face. "You know whose vehicle that is," she said quietly. Daniel hesitated. He looked from Eleanor to Lily, then back to the photograph. Finally he sighed. "I wish I didn't." Neither woman spoke. Daniel removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That truck belonged to Thomas Reed, the groundskeeper?" Lily asked. Daniel nodded. "He passed away 6 months ago." Silence filled the room. "But that's impossible," Lily whispered. "These pictures were taken only a few weeks ago." Daniel looked back at the photograph. "No." His voice had become almost a whisper. "The truck is still being driven." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. "By whom?" Daniel met her eyes. "I've only seen the driver once. And I couldn't see the face." He paused. "But I can tell you one thing." "What?" "It wasn't Thomas." Outside, thunder rolled across the Iowa sky as autumn rain began falling against the farmhouse windows. None of them noticed the old pickup truck parked nearly a quarter-mile away behind an abandoned grain shed. Its engine idled quietly. Inside, an unseen driver watched Eleanor's farmhouse through binoculars. Then, after confirming the lights were still on, the truck slowly disappeared into the rain. If you've ever been blessed by someone who never expected recognition, or if you've quietly helped another person without seeking credit, I'd love for you to share that story in the comments. Sometimes the smallest unseen acts become the greatest testimony. Inside the farmhouse, Eleanor unfolded Frank's mysterious note one more time. Her eyes returned to the sentence she had nearly overlooked. "When the time is right." Only now did she notice faint writing pressed into the paper beneath the visible ink, writing that could only be seen when the page caught the light. She held it near the lamp. Very slowly, a second message began to appear. Eleanor tilted the note toward the lamp, turning it ever so slightly until the faint impressions hidden beneath the visible words caught the light. At first, the marks looked like nothing more than the grooves left behind by a pen writing on the page above another sheet of paper. Then, little by little, letters began to emerge. "If you have found this, meet with a bell first ring before sunrise." No date, no signature, no explanation. Just one more mystery. Lily leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Eleanor folded the note carefully before answering. I think I know." Race Fellowship's current building had stood on the hill for nearly 80 years, but before that there had been a much smaller wooden chapel closer to the river. Long before Eleanor was born, the original church bell had hung from a simple timber frame beside that little building. The chapel had burned after a lightning strike decades ago, and only its stone foundation remained. Most younger people in Maple Creek barely knew it had ever existed. "That's where Frank proposed to me," Eleanor said quietly. "He always loved that old place." The next morning, before the sun climbed above the cornfields, Eleanor and Lily drove the narrow county road toward the abandoned church site. A blanket of mist floated over the river. The air carried the cool scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The remains of the old foundation rested beneath towering oak trees, almost hidden by time. Moss covered the weathered stones, and only a rusted iron bracket hinted that a church bell had once welcomed worshippers there. Nothing seemed unusual. For several minutes they searched the area without finding anything. Then Lily noticed fresh footprints in the dew. Someone had been there recently. The tracks led behind one of the old oaks. Nestled inside the hollow trunk sat a small cedar box. Unlike the baskets, this one was locked. Eleanor reached into her cardigan and removed the silver key. It fit. Inside rested several neatly folded letters, an old leather-bound Bible with worn corners, and a black-and-white photograph. The photograph showed 6 people standing outside the original Grace Fellowship Chapel nearly 30 years earlier. Eleanor recognized every face. Frank, Thomas Reed, Samuel Walker, Margaret Ellis, the retired postmaster, Harold Benson, the town's former school bus driver, and Ruth Collins, owner of the bakery that had closed years ago. On the back, written in Frank's familiar handwriting, were 6 simple words: "We promised no one would know." Lily looked from the photograph to Eleanor. "This started with them." Eleanor slowly nodded. "It seems it did." One by one, they unfolded the letters. Each had been written by a different member of the group. Thomas described losing everything in a house fire when he was a young husband. Before sunrise, one winter morning, someone had left enough money on his porch for his family to survive. He never discovered who had done it. Margaret wrote about receiving groceries during the hardest months after her husband died. Harold told of a stranger paying the mortgage on his farmhouse during the recession of the 1980s. Ruth remembered finding flour, sugar, and butter outside her bakery just days before she would have been forced to close. Every story ended the same way. When God carried us through, we promised we would someday carry someone else. No one claimed to have started the tradition. Each believed they had simply inherited it. The chain of quiet generosity stretched farther back than any of them knew. Lily sat silently, overwhelmed. "It isn't one anonymous giver." "No," Eleanor whispered. "It's a legacy." As they carefully packed the letters away, another realization settled over Eleanor. Only 2 names from the photograph were still living: she and Samuel Walker. Back in town, Daniel Pierce had spent the previous evening reviewing old church financial records, trying to understand whether any unusual donations had ever appeared. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary. Grace Fellowship's books balanced perfectly year after year. No unexplained withdrawals, no mysterious deposits, no hidden accounts. Yet hundreds of lives had quietly been helped over decades. He closed the ledger in frustration. "There has to be another piece." Rachel entered carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You've barely slept. I can't let this go." She smiled gently. "Maybe that's because you're trying to solve something that was never meant to be a puzzle." Daniel sighed. "I've always believed every answer could be found. And what if this isn't about finding an answer?" He looked at her. "What if it's about becoming part of one?" Her words lingered long after she left the room. That afternoon, Pastor Michael received an unexpected visitor. Samuel Walker stood in the church office holding his cap in both hands. "I suppose it's time." Pastor Michael motioned toward the chair. "Time for what?" Samuel smiled sadly. "For the secret to stop belonging to only a few old men." The pastor's heart quickened. "You know, I know enough." Samuel reached into his jacket and placed a folded envelope on the desk. "My doctor says my heart isn't what it used to be." "I'm sorry." Samuel nodded. "We all reach that bridge sooner or later." He looked around the office before continuing. "For 30 years I believed the greatest kindness was the one no one ever heard about. And now, I'm afraid the kindness might die with us." Pastor Michael carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten list. Dozens of names. Many were crossed out. Others had dates beside them. At the bottom appeared one unfinished sentence: "The next caretaker should always be someone who." The line ended abruptly. Samuel never finished writing it. Just then, there was another knock at the office door. Eleanor stepped inside. The moment she saw the photograph lying beside Samuel's envelope, both of them understood. Neither asked how the other had found it. Neither seemed surprised. Samuel simply smiled. "So, Frank finally decided it was time." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "You knew." "I knew your husband better than almost anyone." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because he made me promise." Sammy looked toward the sanctuary windows where afternoon sunlight streamed across the pews. He used to say that the moment people start remembering the hands, they'll forget the heart. Pastor Michael listened in complete silence. His entire understanding of the mystery was changing. It had never been about one extraordinary person. It had always been about ordinary believers quietly passing compassion from one generation to the next. But one question still remained. If Frank passed away 12 years ago, Pastor Michael asked softly, who has been delivering the baskets these last few months? Samuel's smile slowly faded. I don't know. You truly don't? He shook his head. I stopped making deliveries after my surgery last spring. Then someone else. Samuel nodded. Someone I never trained. The room fell silent. If no surviving member of the original group had continued the tradition, who had? At that very moment, Lily sat at her desk reviewing every photograph she had taken over the past year. She enlarged one image she had overlooked dozens of times before. It showed the mysterious pickup truck turning out of the church parking lot before sunrise. For the first time, sunlight reflected off the driver's side mirror, just enough to illuminate the driver's face. Lily froze. She knew that face, not because she saw the person every day, because she had never expected to see them behind the wheel. She immediately grabbed the photograph and ran for the front door. Lily hardly remembered locking the front door behind her. The photograph trembled in her hands as she climbed onto her bicycle and pedaled toward Grace Fellowship with everything she had. The autumn air stung her cheeks, and the wind tugged at her jacket, but her mind raced faster than her legs ever could. She replayed the image over and over. The reflection had lasted only a fraction of a second. One flash of morning sunlight, one face. She had enlarged the photograph 3 different times before allowing herself to believe what she was seeing. By the time she reached the church, Eleanor, Pastor Michael, and Samuel were still gathered in the office. Breathless, Lily pushed open the door. I know who was driving the truck. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Without saying another word, she laid the photograph on Pastor Michael's desk. The room fell silent. Samuel leaned forward first. His weathered hands rested on either side of the picture. For several long moments he simply stared. Then tears filled his eyes. I'll be. His voice cracked before he could finish. Pastor Michael looked from the photograph to Samuel. You recognize them? Samuel nodded slowly. I do. Eleanor looked again, her own eyes widening. I should have seen it sooner. The face in the mirror belonged to Ben Harper, Lily's father, the quiet church custodian, the man who unlocked classrooms, repaired broken faucets, shoveled snow from the sidewalks before sunrise, and rarely stayed long enough after Sunday service for anyone to thank him. Lily looked completely bewildered. My dad? Samuel smiled through tears. That sounds exactly like Ben. But he's never said anything. He wouldn't. Almost on cue, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Ben paused when he saw all 4 of them standing in the office. He glanced at the photograph, then at Samuel, then at Eleanor. His shoulders lowered ever so slightly. So, he said with a gentle sigh, I guess the pictures finally caught up with me. No one spoke. There was no anger in the room, only curiosity. Pastor Michael quietly closed the office door. Would you tell us? Ben removed his work gloves and turned them over in his hands before answering. I suppose it's time. He looked toward Samuel. I hope I haven't broken any promises. Samuel shook his head. No, you've kept every one of them. Ben smiled faintly. It started the week after your surgery. He looked at Samuel. You were worried. Samuel nodded. I remember. You asked me to move a few baskets because you couldn't lift them anymore. I did. I wasn't supposed to know who they were for. You didn't. I just drove. Ben paused, searching for the right words. But after making those first deliveries, I couldn't stop. Lily listened in stunned silence. You never told me. Her father smiled. I didn't tell anyone. He explained that after his wife died, there had been nights when he questioned whether he still had anything meaningful left to give. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't influential. Most Sundays people barely noticed him unless something needed fixing. Then Samuel had trusted him with those anonymous deliveries. For the first time in years, he felt useful again. I realized something, Ben said quietly. You don't have to change everyone's life. He looked around the room. Sometimes helping one family through one impossible week is enough. Eleanor wiped away another tear. But the money, Ben smiled. It was never mine alone. He opened an old notebook he had carried beneath his arm. Inside were names, not recipients, contributors. Some gave $20. Some baked bread. One mechanic repaired cars without charging labor. A pharmacist quietly paid for prescriptions. A farmer donated eggs every month. A retired nurse bought winter coats. A bakery in the next town baked extra loaves every Friday. No one knew the complete list, not even Ben. Whenever someone asked if they could help quietly, another name appeared. It became bigger than me, he said. I was only carrying the baskets. Pastor Michael slowly turned the pages. The notebook revealed something beautiful. No one had been asked. No fundraising campaign had ever been announced. No recognition dinners had been held. Compassion had spread almost the way a candle lights another candle. One quiet act, then another, until an entire community had unknowingly become part of something larger than itself. Daniel Pierce arrived a few minutes later, after Pastor Michael asked him to come. When he entered, he expected another clue. Instead, he found the answer. He listened without interrupting as Ben told the entire story. When it was over, Daniel sat quietly for several moments. Finally, he looked at Ben. I owe you an apology. Ben smiled. You don't owe me anything. I judged the mystery before I understood the heart behind it. He looked toward Eleanor, and I judged some people simply because they seemed to know more than I did. Eleanor reached across the table and gently rested her hand on his. We've all done that. Daniel lowered his head. I kept looking for accountability. And that's not wrong, Pastor Michael said. But sometimes accountability begins by asking whether we're protecting trust or replacing it with suspicion. Daniel nodded slowly. I think somewhere along the way I forgot the difference. The following Sunday, Race Fellowship was fuller than anyone could remember. Not because the mystery had become public. It hadn't. Pastor Michael had no intention of announcing names. Instead, he stood before the congregation holding nothing more than an old blue ribbon. He smiled warmly. For months we've all wondered about unexpected kindness. A few people exchanged knowing glances. We've asked who. He paused. But perhaps the better question has always been, why? The sanctuary grew perfectly still. He spoke about neighbors carrying one another through difficult seasons, about quiet faithfulness, about the extraordinary strength hidden inside ordinary people. He never mentioned Ben. He never mentioned Samuel. He never mentioned Frank. He didn't need to. Some stories become smaller the moment they are turned into headlines. This one was meant to remain a testimony. After the service ended, something unexpected happened. No announcement had been made. No invitation had been given. Yet people began quietly approaching the small wooden basket that now rested near the church entrance. Some placed grocery store gift cards inside. Others left envelopes. One child tucked in $5 from a birthday card. An elderly widow added a handwritten promise to bake pies whenever they were needed. A mechanic slipped in a business card with only 4 handwritten words. Repairs, no charge. No one applauded. No one kept records. No one asked who had given what. By the end of the morning, the basket was overflowing. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. Spring welcomed another Iowa summer. The anonymous gifts never stopped. Sometimes they were baskets of food. Sometimes they were repaired roofs after a storm. Sometimes they were school supplies left quietly on a porch. Sometimes they were simply a handwritten note reminding someone they were not alone. The blue ribbon continued to appear. No one tried to trace it anymore. Children who grew up in Grace Fellowship came to think of it as a quiet reminder that kindness didn't need a name to be real. Years later, when Samuel Walker passed peacefully into the presence of the Lord, his funeral filled the sanctuary beyond capacity. People stood along the walls. Farmers, teachers, nurses, veterans, store owners, young families, and children whose lives had been touched without ever knowing how. During the service, Pastor Michael shared only one sentence Samuel had repeated many times. If people remember my name, I've probably done it wrong. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. After everyone left, Eleanor remained in the sanctuary for a few extra moments. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows just as it had on thousands of Sunday mornings before. She walked to the entrance. The wooden basket was there. A fresh blue ribbon rested beside it. She smiled. Not because the mystery had finally been solved, but because she realized it never truly had been. The mystery was never about discovering one anonymous giver. It was about discovering how one quiet act of love could become another, and another, until an entire community reflected the heart of Christ without ever needing recognition. As she stepped outside, she looked across the fields Frank had loved so much. She remembered the note that had first led her back into the story. When the time is right, you'll know where this belongs. She finally understood. The key had never belonged to a cabinet. The notebook had never belonged to one caretaker. The basket had never belonged to one family. They belonged to every willing heart that chose compassion over applause. Perhaps that's why the smallest acts often become the ones heaven remembers longest. If this story leaves us with anything, let it be this. We may never know all the quiet ways our kindness changes another person's life. A meal delivered without fanfare, a bill paid in secret, a listening ear offered at just the right moment, or a prayer whispered for someone who never hears it. These things rarely make headlines, yet they have a way of becoming the turning points in someone's story. Faith is not measured only in the words we speak on Sunday morning. More often, it is revealed in what we choose to do when no one is watching. And maybe the greatest legacy we can leave isn't a building with our name engraved on it, or a monument that people stop to admire. Maybe it's a life that quietly teaches others to become an answer to someone else's prayer. Long after Eleanor had gone home, the evening sun settled behind the hills of Maple Creek. A young couple, new to the church, stepped hesitantly into the empty foyer. They noticed the simple wooden basket. There was no sign explaining it, no instructions. Only a small blue ribbon tied gently around the handle. The husband looked at his wife. Without saying a word, they placed a loaf of homemade bread inside. Then they walked away hand in hand. No one saw them. No one thanked them. And that was exactly how the story was meant to continue. The truest measure of faith is not how brightly our names are remembered, but how quietly God's love continues through the lives we touch.